Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. Now, let's get started off with some news. This isn't going to be as much of a taxing and lengthy episode like last week because in terms of news, there's not really that much. So let's just head on right into it and start off with movie news. Now, Marvel takes the lead on this one with the only actual movie news of substance, which is that they have started releasing as part of their advertising campaign at last for Captain Marvel, Brie Larson and Jude Law and Samuel L. Jackson starring and all that. Now, their pictures are pretty much your standard stuff you would see all the time. You'd see the hero shot, we see Brie Larson in a full costume, we see the antagonist, the Skrulls, in a menacing shot, we see all the side characters like Monica Rambeau's mother, Jude Law as Captain Marvel, Korath, Ronan the Accuser, we see all this stuff. So, it looks okay. There's nothing that looks cheap or shoddily designed except for maybe the Skrulls, and I'll have to agree with that on a few points because they look very last minute and not very thought out design wise. They feel very rushed. What they do is they make them very veiny or at least very creased and wrinkly, and the purple cap they wear is now skin discoloration that isn't pointing just on the crown of their head, that's somehow crests down like if it was a helm, which is a weird choice because it just makes it feel very half measure. Like, we don't want to use a cap, but we're just going to do this to allude to it, and instead it just makes it feel like they didn't want to try enough. So you get comparisons to things like Piccolo from Dragon Ball Evolution in terms of just making them kinda like it, but overall taking steps backward and not really going full front with it, which I think that everyone would believe the MCU would already be way past feeling in terms of like that cold concession or indecisiveness about how camp or how straight they should play things. Overall, as just your general Skrull designs, they're not really that inspiring, but then again, the original Skrull designs aren't that great either. Hopefully we'll only see them a minute amount of the time. Another thing people have been calling out, at least in terms of praise, is the CGI digital de-aging on Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury character. He's younger in this version, and I'm not getting the hype. He looks kind of the same, as it looks like a kind of de-aging job they could have used mainly on makeup. In terms of de-aging, I think that the MCU has had some really great highs, like with young Kurt Russell on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, or young Hank Pym in the prologue to Ant-Man, and some serious lows like young Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War, who looks like a CGI model double. So it's not great, but it's definitely not as groundbreaking as some people are trying to make it out to be. But overall, pretty average stuff. We haven't seen any footage yet, but at least it doesn't look laughable or anything like that, except for maybe the Skrulls. As I've said, there's no real DC movie news except for some people starting a praise chain for Ben Affleck's canceled Batman script, including Joe Manganiello, who starred as Deathstroke, or who was going to star as Deathstroke, and Jay Olivia, who is a storyboarder for some of DC's animated movies. So overall, I guess Marvel wins the cake on this one. In terms of TV news, however, DC actually does take the lead role, as we have some really fun casting news in terms of their streaming service. The first being that we have finally gotten the casting for Abby Arcane, the lead of the Swamp Thing series. It is Crystal Reed, who, if anyone watches Gotham like I do, was one of the antagonists of the last season as Sophia Falcone. And she did a great job there, and I think that she'll be a very capable lead. One thing that does give me some pause is that apparently the director of the Underworld series is doing the pilot and might be helping out with helming the show, if not outright showrunner. We haven't heard confirmation on that yet, but it does make me worried that it might fall into a lot of melodrama and stupidity like those movies did. Fingers crossed. But Crystal Reed definitely has the sort of enigmatic charisma and very stern attitude to make Abby Arcane a very well-defined character, so I'm looking forward to that immensely. But in perhaps a larger splash that was made in terms of DC's casting was Timothy Dalton as Niles Calder for the Doom Patrol series. Now, Niles Calder has been in kind of a purgatory in terms of his casting because he was cast already for the backdoor pilot episode of Titans, as was most of the other cast that have already been replaced, with the only news after that being that they were trying to get, or these rumors that they were trying to get Kelsey Grammer to play him, which was also great casting. So Timothy Dalton. Either way, it was going to be a win-win situation because Kelsey Grammer and Timothy Dalton, they both have such a lot of qualities that would make that role really pop and shine under their performance, under their acting ability. So I'm happy either way. Yet that's not the only splash that Doom Patrol has made in the last week. We actually do have set photos of Doom Patrol, and they all look really great. We have a full costume robot man. He's going to be an actual suit, actual robotic suits with a sort of 80s young animal style jacket and shirt combo on. The amount of effort going into Doom Patrol and hopefully is starting to tinge into Swamp Thing are miles ahead of Titans, even though I still have hope in Titans. It's looking like at least the first wave of shows is going to have a lot of pull behind it that I don't think a lot of people are going to be expected, but will hopefully be blown away by. Seriously, those set photos are great, and Timothy Dalton, if you haven't seen Penny Dreadful, it's not the greatest show, but I think that his performance as one of the leads of that show will definitely influence and read into whatever choices he might make in bringing Calder to life. So really excited for that. And finally, in terms of comic news, we have confirmation that Aquaman will be doing some synergy stuff with regards to the release date and the movie coming out, which is Momoa. Aquaman is being redesigned into the same sort of mold as Momoa's character is. The whole shirtlessness, long hair, beard, and pants. It's not really an indication of where the series is actually going to go. I know that DC more or less does this all the time. They did it with Bane during Forever Evil, when they gave him, at least from the neck down, the Dark Knight Rises Bane's design. But even though I have reservations about the movie, I think it's a good look. The only thing I've never been a fan of is the hook hand, because I think that's pretty lame, but overall it's a decent look, and I know a lot of people are on the fence about Kelly Sue DeConnick's run, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be hewing to an annoyingly synergistic level, because like I said, that's not really in DC's wheelhouse, at least in terms of story content, so it's nice. I know there are a lot of rumors saying that's going to do a lot like the movie, but with the movie being in such a flux place already, I can't see DC or WB trying to hitch their wagon to it just yet. Maybe if it's a hit. And for our final piece of news, we have more Comicsgate's malfunctions. And I only bring this up because it's still just one of the funniest things to happen, and it's that we finally reached a place that they are at least knowingly starting to eat each other. And I only say knowingly because, well, they were already eating each other, at least the people who are being propped up by this movement. They were feasting on the masses. So to that end, there was this whole willingly blind filter that was going through everyone's eyes who were supporting this and paying through the nose into these crowd funds that is more or less sort of dropped, at least for one creator, Vox Day, who has sought out to copyright Comicsgate as the name for a comic publisher he's trying to prop up. And the reaction to that was pretty immediate, with a lot of people, this is the funniest thing, stating that because a large contingent of the Comicsgate community was backing All Hero, although I can't understand anyone else who was not in that contingent backing it, so let's just say 100% of contingent backing it, that because of his pridefulness in trying to copyright this name, they are no longer going to be supporting the series, despite the fact that he's already run off with hundreds of thousands of your money. So, too late. And the wording of this, there was a really long rant about how people like Vox Day need to beware their dollar and their consumers and all that, when, like I said, you can't say something about how powerful your dollar is, how you know the power of your dollar, and everyone else should be aware of it, when you've been fleeced and conned so many times over and everyone is now aware of that. So that was really funny, especially since it's starting to proceedingly drag EVS down with it, because now there's a faction of Comicsgate community that believes that he and Vox Day were in cahoots and in conspiracy with each other to try and hijack the movement, when they already have. Not only were they already inside doing all this stuff, but you were willingly getting behind it to the umpteenth amount. Them making a comic publisher with that name is no different from them asking for $30 per issue on some sort of website that you willingly pay for. It's a horizontal move, is what I'm trying to get at. But overall, it's still funny, and it's funny just to see them go all in and around about it. But overall, though, it definitely seems to have quieted down, and I think we're all grateful for that. So let's move on into what I read this week, because this was a really, really illuminating and very comforting week. First things first, let's start off with something simple. Immortal Hulk. So the series is actually still going really well, although it does seem to have settled into more of a less atmospheric sensibility than the first couple of issues, but the story content and the actual character arcs and development that's going on underneath it is honestly still pretty good. I think that Ewing is doing a great job overall in just making a fun superhero comic, or at least a very satisfactory read of one. While this issue doesn't do anything, let's say, out of the ordinary or something so exemplary of that, the stuff between, say, Sasquatch and the Hulk is exceedingly well done, and presenting the villain and the motivations, or at least the burgeoning thematic resonance of the villain, is really hard-hitting. I know that it brings back a character that is one of my favorite characters, is one of my favorite aspects of the PAD run and all that, especially when you take into account that it was one of the things that was really well adapted in the first movie, and that is the return of Bruce Banner's father, his abusive and mentally deranged father. And it leaves it off in such a way that is honestly very well done. There's this whole theme, there's this whole undercurrent and really, really incisive element of a cycle of violence. And it's played in a way that is a little bit understated, but that just adds to its prominence. Because you have, of course, Bruce Banner's father becoming insane and abusive, and that leading to Bruce's emotional and mental repression that helps in cultivating the Hulk personality that unleashes in the future, or at least in the present when he's an adult. But not only that, we see the character, one of the few point characters, a reporter who is on the hunt for Bruce. And we heard a backstory earlier on where she and her family had been impacted by one of his rampages. And now we get her motivation, her real underlying reason for doing all this, for going all this way and for trying to go against the odds and tracking Bruce Banner and the Hulk down, by him being a killing machine. And that's because she wants to feel that power too, or at least either in a way that is to find control of her life using something to become like the Hulk. So you see, it's a great analogy for that whole sense of trying to be culpable in your life, trying to have that measure of actual leverage over the things around you, whether it be through abusive control or through trying to get the same level of strength or power in your own life, either through any kind of means, and you end up perpetuating the same kind of damage and destruction. Both all sort of superhero comics, this kind of thing becomes outward and very face-front emotional constructs. It works. It really does work, and it's a great issue. So like I said, it's not as atmospheric or not as sort of moody and kind of gothic. It's very much more standard superhero fare, but the character stuff and the story content is insanely good, and it sticks with me. This is a great series so far, and I'm really glad to be reading it. Next up, we have Stray Bullets, Sunshine and Roses, number 38, with perhaps one of its most interesting issues so far, because it takes a plot element from throughout the entire series, and it gives it a new light that makes it honestly incredibly frustrating, but also really tantalizing to try and get into. And I'll have to parse this down a little bit. Even though it's spoilers, I'm going to try and parse this down because it definitely deserves some dissection. One of the most constant parts of the series is this narrative device that David Lapham uses with regards to one of the main characters, Virginia Applejack, and that there will be some issues where you go through the viewpoint of a character called Amy Racecar, who is sort of the self-insert for Virginia Applejack through stories that she writes. And so whenever an issue pops up, it will be about the events that are going to happen either relatively soon or somewhere down the line in the arc. So you get a sort of foreshadowing through a very deranged and very chaotic lens, because the Amy Racecar stories are characterized through a very volatile mix of noir, sci-fi, pulp, and superhero tropes and cliches that are all just bundled together into pure insanity. But still, when you go back and you read one of these Amy Racecar issues after reading through the arc, you can spot the threads that it started setting up or that it wanted to capitalize later on. But like I said, it's consigned to this main character. She based it off herself, off her own life, off her face, and everything like that. So when that character and those issues started appearing in Sunshine and Roses, which is a prequel set years before that character is created by Virginia Applejack, my thought was that each of these issues was doing the reverse. It was talking about stuff in the past, but in the past relative to where one of the characters of Sunshine and Roses ends up, because one of the main characters in the present, i.e. the late 70s, early 80s, is in prison. So my thought was, these must be stories that this character who will meet Virginia in the future, is reminiscing about those times in her life where things went wrong, i.e. the Sunshine and Roses mega storyline. That is all thrown out the window with this one, where we find out that the Amy Racecar issues in Sunshine and Roses are running concurrently with the events of Sunshine and Roses. They all are in the subconscious of Beth, one of the main characters, which makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't, because they haven't met Virginia yet. So it does create this question of, what is Amy Racecar to begin with then? Is it something like a leitmotif for different characters? It's not that she is beholden to any one character, but she is something that just pops up as sort of a totem for the derangement and for the really messy and turbulent aspects of this criminal life that Stray Bullets is all about. And if that's the way they're going with it, and if we can see Amy Racecar be passed along the line to other characters and other sort of delusions and dreams that they have and stories that they share, then that would be fantastic. It would be hell to pull off, but it would be amazing. what really hammers us down is that the character who has been using Amy Racecar's stories throughout the arc, she is in a semi-coma throughout the issue. So there are things that she cannot know, but that she somehow knows inside her subconscious, inside the dream, inside the story that she's living. That does lend a little bit more to that magic realism, to the illusory of reality that is going on here. That whole curtain of the grounded nature of the series that you used to have to something different. And we've been getting that before. Say, I think I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, of a character who begins having visions of the future while he's all doped up. Now, I mentioned also that was dropped. That was never brought up again, even in issues that Solicit said they would be brought up in. Because I know that something like Young Bullets also played around with this, but a lot more overtly, and was more of the core focus about how breakable and how fragile reality was. And I would really be disappointed if it did go in that much of a direction. It's not a series that should go that far, although I like the tinges of it. If it just keeps it like as an undercurrent, as something that just sort of happens, and it's something that you're supposed to read into in terms of thematics, then great. But I don't want to see you go too far into it, because then you're losing the tone that I really did appreciate. Either or, great issue. It made me think a lot. Even though this series has been going on for so long, it's still wildly unpredictable. And penultimately, we have Sandman the Dreaming #1 with art by Bilquis Evely and written by Cy Spurrier. So let's get into it. Now, I was kind of lax on the Sandman Universe one-shot that was the launch pad for all the series that are going to be set in the Sandman playbox. Although for me, the Dreaming was always going to be something that I was going to pick up because I like the writer and I love the artist, so that was a surefire, at least first buy. Although, still though, I wasn't quite sure about it until I actually got this first issue, and overall, I really enjoyed it. It's not something that is so exhilarating or is so much of a hook to begin with, but it is incredibly well crafted. Bilquis Evely's art is amazing, and they do such wonderful things with the framing, the wonderful fluidity and care put into the detail. It's incredibly, let's say, ecstatic at points. Wonderful, joyous, and comfortable. It's a weird word to use about art, but that's what it is. It's very open. It's very open art and expressive and all that amazing things you want series about this kind of atmosphere, about this kind of content to be. Which I think pairs well with Cy Spurrier, because while I know that Spurrier has a lot of faults and flaws to him, he has been nothing but really, really content with focusing in on the nature of stories and nature of play and narrative and construction of these things. So bringing him in and making one of his viewpoint characters the librarian in The Dreaming is a great little move so that it becomes a lot more adaptable to that stability than other times, other points when it just sticks out immensely. The Dreaming creates this sense of unfolding breakage and playfulness and adventure. It's a great little fantasy romp. So far, it does hit all those nice beats that you would expect, and I love it. I really do. And it was a great first issue. It sets up everything it needs to. I think that the little ins and out and dynamics traded between, say, Matthew and the librarian and Merv Pumpkinhead and Dora, and even that little button end with Ziggy the Blank. I hope he comes back in. I want to see more of Ziggy the Blanks and all the blank canvases. It's great. It definitely has all the foundation and bones it needs. So 2 out of 2 stars. And for the last thing I read this week, and possibly the one that I was most worried about, was Border Town #1 from Eric M. Esquivel and Villalobos on the art. While I enjoy it, I want to get that out right away because I know that I'm going to be talking about some things that might make it seem like I didn't enjoy this, but I did enjoy this. First and foremost, that is my takeaway. I would recommend this. I would say that it is one of my favorite reads this week and that I was very entertained by it. Still, there are some caveats. Now, I know that I mentioned the preview in an earlier episode, and my thoughts on that preview haven't changed one bit. I still think that the preview and the section of the issue that encompasses the preview is really badly done, and it's a very jarring and eye-rolling segment of the issue. Just not entertaining. It's a really bad part of the whole. On the other hand, the rest of the issue and where that segment is in the context of that issue more than makes up for it. And what that means is that the segment of the preview, while I don't think it was written well, it serves its purpose as a very commonplace cliche and trope in terms of setting up the character dynamics. which is an important distinction to make, because let's contrast a bit here with something like Marvel's America, where you have something that is very much offer rant and offer insert, very offer focused and enveloping message and lecture just crammed in and all over the place with America, where if you took that stuff out, there wouldn't be anything left, because that's what the entire series is about. All of it revolves around that message, around the rant, around the lecture, around the offer, and the offer really trying to make themselves the point of the book. While in Border Town, the rant and a lot of the character aspects of the character stating it, Francisco, is all based and entirely molded on Eric M. Esquivel's personality, life, and ideology. It's really only there as character setup for Frank. You could pull that out and the story would be unaffected, because there is a story. It is a beat in that story. The story itself has more going on than just servicing the character and the characters lecturing to the reader. Similarly to Wicked and the Divine, which is something that is completely Gillen and McKelvey. It's totally based on their fashion sense, on their cultural sense of taste, ideology, their philosophy about life, about entertainment, about the youth. It's entirely about them. But all these things are formatted to the characters and how they interact with each other, not to the story and how it unfolds and how it develops and depicts itself to the person actually trying to read it as a comic or as a piece of entertainment. You can ignore one of the characters in Wicked and the Divine talking about cultural appropriatism, because despite that being a part of the series where they're talking about it and where they obviously are voicing the concerns of the author, it doesn't have any impact on, say, the unfolding mystery of the murders of the gods or what their purpose is and how they're being betrayed or anything about that. You could cut that out and the story would still be as tight and as well written in terms of the actual core content of the plot. Same thing with Border Town. So while I think that segment of that lecturing was really, really awful, the rest is pretty good. It's your general adventure kid gang stuff with some occult influences. It's really entertaining. So I give it pass from that, because you can lecture and you can give as much messages into your comic as you want, but the story has to always come first. There always has to be a story. Everything leading up to that part and after it is just always about developing either the characters between themselves and the relation to and reactions to just this unfolding, chaotic, and monster-driven mess. And it's that aspect that really does speak out to me and really does entertain me, and I'm very fair with that kind of thing. If America had actual story content to it other than just being, here's my thoughts parroted through this excuse of a plot and all the characters revolving around that ideology, then sure. But here we have, say, Francisco, who, as I said, is the obvious author self-insert. I think they even have the same backstory in terms of cultural heritage, because I follow the author on Twitter and I've seen stuff like that, like, of course. So it's meant to be him. He's the main character. He's made himself the leader of this kid gang, so whatever, that happens sometimes. Just Roman clefs exist in literature for a reason. Sometimes we like writing about ourselves, we know ourselves and what we would do in our taste, so that's fine. But it's not that everyone else revolves around that same sort of ideology. You have Kinte, who is more or less just concerned with being affable and friendly, and he's very amicable. He's a very nice kind of guy. And you have Amy and Giulietta, who are more on the sidelines, who have more of a cynical and pragmatic view on things, which is contrast to Francisco, or Frank, who is very much volatile and very passionate and driven in terms of his own self-concerns, and is also very inward-facing to a fault. So while that segment is very much the part where the author and the writer goes, okay, let me lay out not racist and all of my own personal tastes, everything else is defined beside that, not around it or through it. So that's great. And it's, like I said, capable, at least for the first issue, kid gang type stuff. While it's all catering to the self-insert character and, you know, of course, that sort of out of context stuff, it doesn't feel dragged down by it. And it's an entertaining read, other than that one segment, which I'll never ever get used to. But thankfully, we're past it, and the art by Villalobos is really great. And there are some cameos here and there. It's fun stuff. I noticed a little caricature chibi version plush of Chapulín Colorado, who is sort of a comic character who, let's say, would probably have inspired Bumblebee Man on The Simpsons. So yeah, very enjoyable stuff, and I got the first issue, and hopefully it will keep up that level of entertainment and balance between the story content and the message content. One thing I do want to know is that this series has gotten a lot of press about how it's an immigration allegory. And I wanted to take some stock about how the first issue presents that, in that we have some notes about how Mexicans are fleeing from Mexico because, well, things are bad down there, so they want to come to America and start over and seek new opportunities. And so that's immigration. That's the real life text. Now, the subtext in the series itself is that apparently chupacabras, shape-shifting, man-eating demons in this context, are being sent out from the mystical occult underworld of Mexican folklore by their own horrible circumstances, which is, I think, a weird thing to try and parallel, and I'm sure there's more to it, but for the first issue it does come off kind of backward, because if that's the sort of analogy you're trying to make, well, we see the chupacabras as being really, really horrible little demon monsters, and we all know that. So, but anyway, it's fun read, and I can't wait to see where this goes, and hopefully it will go good places and not just whinge around. Anyway, let's get on into listener questions. We have 2 questions this week. One from the incomparable Illuminated, who I will link below, because honestly, go check all these out. They're great, and you'd be missing out. You really would. And Illuminated's question is, why did I like Bright, and what do I think the critics missed? Now, for some background to this, there had been a tweet online saying, what are some red flags for you? And only semi-jokingly, I quote tweeted that as, anyone who says End of Days isn't Arnold's best movie, and anyone who says that Bright or Neo Yokio is bad, those are reasonable red flags. And so I guess Illuminate wants to know why I like Bright. And let's be honest, I like Bright because it's a simple story. I don't want to say other critics missed something, but I do think that they didn't put the emphasis on the story, more on the actual undercurrent and intent of the message within the story. Now, Bright, much like, say, Border Town, has a message, and that there is some balanced stuff going on with that. With Bright, the message about racism and about classism and all this sort of segregation and prejudice, in this case between humanity and other levels of sentience and magical beings against orcs. Orcs are seen as second-class race, and they have lots of stereotypes and prejudices against them. So when I see a lot of criticisms about the movie, it's about how the movie handled that aspect. And to be honest, it doesn't handle it that great, mainly because it doesn't really do much with it. It just uses it as backdrop in order to add dynamism and some real friction and conflict in between the two leads, Will Smith and Joel Edgerton, with Joel Edgerton playing an orc. So what you get is a story that doesn't really do or fulfill that potential, at least that aspect of the potential. But overall, the story isn't really trying to do much of that to begin with. And again, that's something that other critics, they felt was a flaw. I don't. I think that it's a missed opportunity, but as a buddy cop thing that it's trying to do in the vein of something like, say, Lethal Weapon 1 or Alienation, it hits that mark really well. You get a really great sense that these characters are developing their relationship and their camaraderie throughout the movie. Joel Edgerton and Will Smith bounce off each other great, and Joel Edgerton's performance as an orc, as someone who's very flappable, who's very affable, who's a bit more downtrodden and insecure about his place between other orcs and with his partner and humanity at large and society, he does a great job with it. And honestly, it's one of his best performances, and it showcases just how great he is as an actor. So that whole angle of it is solid. As a buddy cop thing with some minor tinges, it's an okay detective story. It's an okay sort of semi-mystery, semi-dramatic police thing. So while it's not one of my favorite movies, I think that a lot of things that I like in these kinds of stories, it does well. I'm really entertained by it. And when news of the sequel came out days after it premiered, I'm like, yes, I want to see more of this dynamic. I want to see more of these characters evolve and to really see where they go next, because I think they make a really capable and enjoyable pair. Is it a perfect movie? No. Is it a great movie about racism? No. But as a cop movie with really fun interplay, it's above average. Our second question comes from Mitch Gosser, and their question is, in honor of PlayStation 4's Spider-Man coming out, what is my favorite Spider-Man supporting cast member and villain? Great question. While I don't play video games, I do want to honor this release. So, favorite supporting cast member has to be Eddie Brock, because while I have been defending the Venom movie by saying that the two don't have to be intertwined in order to make a solid original movie about him, I do think that there's a lot to acknowledge about how well Peter Parker and Eddie play off each other and the dynamic, just how tangible and fun, or at least entertaining, these riffs and sort of pushes and pulls the two get into can be. In terms of villain, while I do enjoy Venom, I don't really enjoy him as a villain because I think that after a while, putting him at least against Spider-Man would get tired a bit. My favorite Spider-Man villain would have to be the Hobgoblin, because as a kid, I always thought that entire look, while I know that at times it's very reminiscent or at least an outright rip on the Green Goblin outfit and design and aesthetic, Hobgoblin I think is just really fun, and it screams Halloween, and I don't know, that's a very facile reason to have a favorite Spider-Man villain, but it just seems very enigmatic and very outgoing and fun as a design. And sometimes, especially when they really ram into the whole outrageousness of the twisting and turning and convoluted nature of his backstory and who has been Hobgoblin and how they keep slipping in and out of the way, it becomes really fun, especially during Access, where he got his own mini and it was just a heckfire amount of hilarity and gags. So Hobgoblin. So that would be Eddie Brock and Hobgoblin, to answer your question, Mitch. And I hope I answered both of your questions to the best of my ability and to your satisfaction, because thank you so much, both of you, for sending them in. And I am so glad. It means a lot that people even care enough to send them in, to be honest. So anyway, thank you, and thank everyone else for listening. If you have your own questions, topics, or comments you want to hear discussed on the show, you can tweet at me on my Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. With a special shout out to the cover artist at DOTEMCEE. As I said earlier, you can look below and find all of Illuminated's links. Please check those out. You won't regret it. And have a great week, and see you next time.